Order, order. Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that on all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. I would just like to welcome all the guests and in all the galleries. It's great to see you here, but I would just like to caution you not to take part in the proceedings, and that means no clapping or cheering or talking. And you're not to take any pictures or use your appliance for internet or texting. Thank you. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Deputy Premier.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed an honor to stand today and introduce 19 fabulous students from the Humboldt Collegiate Institute, Mr. Speaker, from Humboldt. They are 19 grade 12 students, accompanied by their teacher, David Rao, and I am looking forward to meeting with them later, and I welcome all members to join me in welcoming these fabulous students to their Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great that we've got students in the Assembly today. I'd also like to rise to give a welcome to just dozens, quite a large delegation of CUPE education workers that are joining us here in the Assembly. And as I welcome them to their Assembly, I also want to say thank you, in particular, for the work that they've done over the last 2 years and counting. Really challenging years in our schools for students and teachers, and also for those unsung heroes that help our schools to run the way that they do. So to those CUPE members here today, Rob and the whole crew, I want to say thank you for keeping our buildings running. Thank you to everyone who works in facilities and caretaking. Thank you to all those members who are here today who help our schools stay organized, as maybe library technicians or admin assistants. And thank you to all those who keep pushing the learning forward as educational assistants. There's so many different ways that these ed workers support our students, and they're here today to advocate for stable, adequate, and sustainable funding for our schools. Thank you for being here. I invite all members to join me in welcoming them to their Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member opposite in welcoming the CUPE members that are here today. We thank them for the great work that they continue to do in our schools. I'm a former member of CUPE myself and appreciate very much from internal points basis where they come from, and enjoyed working with them during my time on Saskatoon Public School Board. So I want to wish them well and thank them very much. We may not agree with everything at all times, but we certainly do agree with their commitment to their jobs and to their students, and want to ask all members to welcome them to their legislature. Sure.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in welcoming the CUPE education workers who are here with us today. I too am a former member of CUPE local number 3287, Mr. Speaker, with the sessional lecturers at the university. But in particular, I want to welcome Gracie Kachmar to her assembly today. She's seated in the East Gallery, and Gracie, in addition to being an education worker, is also my second cousin and constituent. So I want to welcome her back to her assembly. She hasn't been here since she was in grade school, so we had a chance to chat a little bit earlier. She's working as an educational assistant this year at Fairhaven School with little grade 1 and 2 students, which she's really enjoying, and she graduated last year from Sask Poly, and before that Walter Murray. So I would ask all members to join me in welcoming Gracie to her assembly today. Here.
Recognize the Minister of Government Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to the rest of the Assembly, I'd like to introduce about 10 staff members from the great organization of SARM, Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, and the great work that these people do to support the municipalities that we have throughout the province. Mr. Speaker, they have wanted to come and watch the proceedings. There's going to be a group today and a smaller group tomorrow that I'll introduce, Mr. Speaker, so this is my practice for the group tomorrow. No, it's not. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce Annette Ellard. If you just want to just give a wave as I introduce your names. Catherine Patterson, Amanda Kozak, Alex Uday, Daniel Segal, Dustin Reish, Brianna Jensen, Bill Treneman, Colin Warnicki, and Gayleen Mellon. Thank you for coming and watching our proceedings in this chamber. You probably have a better idea of what goes on in council chambers, but you'll see us hopefully perform respectfully in this chamber, and I'd like to welcome you all to this assembly.
Recognize the member from Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, it is an honour to join with the Minister and welcome these 10 employees of SARM here today to view proceedings on the floor of your legislature, and also join with him in thanking you for the support and the work that you do in service of rural municipalities from right around this province. Mr. Speaker, of course, valuable work. I hope that, as the Minister opposite said, you will be treated to everyone being on their best behaviour today. Thank you again for all you do, and welcome to your Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Saskatchewan Agriculture Student Scholarship is a vital part of the Government of Saskatchewan's commitment to developing young agriculture leaders. Each year, we recognize 4 young individuals for their passion and dedication to agriculture. This year's winners are all community leaders that wanted to share their story, one of building public trust in agriculture. This year's grand prize winner, and I'd ask the students to give a wave, this year's grand prize winner is Emily Sebastian of Beaumont, Saskatchewan. And our 3 runner-up winners were each awarded scholarships to put towards their agriculture studies. These winners are Christy Peterson of Lockwood, Grace Wallenberger of Marquess, and Kate Axon of Minton. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to acknowledge the 2020 and 2021 recipients that join us in the House here today. Mackenzie Olson from Tisdale, Jesse Patzer from Swift Current, Jessica Davey from Saskatoon, Kylie McNally from Bethune, Sarah Whitnick from Saskatoon, Marcy LeBlanc from Estevan, who could not attend, Isabel Kanash from Wishart, that could not attend, and Mackenzie Van Dam from Imperial, who also could not attend. There will be more details in this year's winners through the member statement later on, Mr. Speaker. I ask all members to join me in congratulating these individuals on outstanding accomplishments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to join with the Minister of Agriculture to welcome these leaders in agriculture, these award winners of the Saskatchewan Ag Student Scholarship to their assembly. The previous ones from last year that likely weren't able to join us due to the state of the pandemic at that time. It's very nice to have you here. And those that have earned recognition this year, importantly, Emily Sebastian, who was the lead on this front, as well to Christy, Grace, and to Kate. Certainly, agriculture is so critical to Saskatchewan. It's an incredibly proud and historic industry, but it's one that's vibrant, dynamic, and so critical to our future as well. And we just want to, on behalf of the official opposition, thank you for your leadership now and well into the future. Ask all members to provide a warm welcome.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you and to the Assembly several visitors that are seated in your gallery this afternoon. There are the articling students who are working with the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General and the courts across Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce Ashley Fulton, Samuel Kelmakoff, Alexa LaPlante, Mary Ellen Meehlin, Britannia Moorbutter, Kennedy Morrow, Jessica Kwan, Bryn Reese, McKinley Sim, and Travis Smith. Mr. Speaker, Ashley Fulton is articling in Yorkton, Saskatchewan with the Crown's office. After her articles, she is going to be staying with Yorkton Prosecutions. Samuel Kelmakoff is articling at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan. After his articles, he'll be joining Faskins in Calgary. Mr. Speaker, Alexa LaPlante is currently articling with the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General. After completing her articles, she'll be working in the civil law branch of the Ministry of Justice. Mary Ellen Meehlin is completing her articles as a clerk with the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan, and after her clerkship, she'll be moving to Saskatoon and will be working as an associate at McDougall Gawley LLP. Britannia Moorbutter is completing her articles with the Court of Queen's Bench for Saskatchewan in Regina. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to introduce Kennedy Morrow, who is presently clerking at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan. After clerking, Kennedy will be joining DBB LLP in Calgary. Jessica Kwan was born in Swift Current and grew up in Saskatoon, where she completed her secondary education. She's now articling with the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General here in Regina, and she'll be joining public prosecutions as a Crown prosecutor upon her completion of articles. Bryn Reese is currently articling with the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General and is on a rotation at Family Justice Services, and after completing her articles, she'll be moving to New Jersey. McKinley Sim is clerking at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan, and after articles, he'll be joining McDougall Gawley LLP in Regina. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce Travis Smith, who is articling as a clerk for the Court of Queen's Bench for Saskatchewan. After completing his articles, he'll be joining MLT Aikens LLP in their Vancouver office. Mr. Speaker, these students are joined today by Teresa Cooper, Legal Counsel for the Deputy Minister of Justice and Deputy Attorney General. She's responsible for the Ministry of Justice articling program and many more. Mr. Speaker, gives me the opportunity to thank Teresa very much for all the support that she gives me and my office here in the building for the work that we do. So thanks very much, Teresa. Mr. Speaker, unable to join us today are Danny Killiers, Scott McKenzie, Alexandria Studer, and Jesse Von Eaton, and Cheyenne Esmond. Mr. Speaker, these individuals understand their roles as defenders of the rule of law, which is fundamental to our democracy. Each will be a credit to our venerable profession as they continue in the pursuit of justice. Mr. Speaker, I wish them all the best in their service to the people of Saskatchewan while they're doing their articles, and best of luck in their future careers, Mr. Speaker. So I'd ask everyone in the Assembly to please join me in welcoming them to their legislative assembly.
Here, here.
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the Minister in welcoming first Teresa Cooper and thank her for all the work that she does serving with the Ministry of Justice, and join with the Minister as well in thanking and welcoming all of these articling students to their legislative assembly. You would all be nearing the end of your articling process if the calendar, if I remember the calendar correctly. So I hope, I just want to say that I hope you all had a rewarding experience. I'm sure you all did. And for those who have chosen to stay in Saskatchewan once you've completed your articles, let me give you an advance welcome to the Saskatchewan Bar. It's, both the Minister and I are proud members of the Saskatchewan Bar, and I can't think of a more collegial and welcoming professional atmosphere for you to join in. Thank you in advance for all the work you will do in your professions, whether you're staying in Saskatchewan or otherwise. I'm sure you will find your career both rewarding and engaging for many, many more years to come. I'd like to ask all members to join me in welcoming all of these folks to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Moose Jaw North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to join the Minister of Justice and the member opposite in welcoming the articling students who were introduced already. Articling is certainly a critical and rewarding part of your career, and I wish you the best of luck in it. I also want to single out my former articling student, Teresa Cooper, who is joining you today. Despite the fact that she was stuck with me as a principal, Mr. Speaker, she's turned out to be a fantastic lawyer. So welcome to Teresa and all the articling students to their assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members, I would like to welcome Bridget Farney to her legislature here today. Bridget is a constituent of mine, daughter of Jim Farney and Christina Addard, and older sister of Gus and housemate of Feline Mouse. She's a 12-year-old grade 7 student from Montessori here on a job shadow day, and her verdict thus far on her visit to the legislature is that it seems like fun. While she's visited the building before, she's never watched Question Period in real life, so we will suppose see how that impression holds. Bridget loves to cook. She wants to be an entrepreneur, although she's also considering seriously a career in law. Her political concerns focus on the environment, poverty, and corporate responsibility, and I had some legitimate help from Bridget earlier today, distilling some thoughts and messages. So sincerely, I think that means we will have a banner day here in Question Period. I'd like to thank all the members of the building for making her feel so welcome today, and just really commend her and say how wonderful it is to see young people in Saskatchewan show such independent and sincere interest in the work that goes on in this place. And I'd like to ask all members to join me in welcoming her to this, her legislature.
Recognize a member from Prince Albert Northcote.
I request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and all members of this Assembly, it is my pleasure to introduce in your gallery former constituents of mine who now reside in Saskatoon, Riversdale. Here, here. Captain Ivan Nahachewski and his wife, Debbie, and his daughter, Nina. Debbie works full-time for the cadets. She's responsible for 15 squadrons and on the west side of the province. And Nina actually just yesterday finished her advanced paramedic program here in Regina, and she's looking forward to heading back to L'Orange, where she says she loves the north, she loves the trees, and she's going back there to use her skills. So Captain Nahachewski, Ivan, is a third-generation Ukrainian chaplain and Greek Catholic priest who recently received the Meritorious Service Medal in recognition of his work while deployed on Operation Unifier in the Ukraine. This medal is given in recognition of Canadian citizens whose achievements bring honour to our country. In 2014, Captain Nahachewski put into practice one of his favourite mantras: to be invested in your church, you must be invested outside it. He went and shared his best practices with the Ukraine and to create a chaplaincy program best suited for its own needs. Mr. Speaker, Ivan credits the guidance of his commanding officer for this achievement, for the trust and authority given to him. A ceremony recognizing this work was held virtually, allowing his Northern Saskatchewan regiment, along with his wife Debbie and her parents, to take part. Mr. Speaker, I now ask all members to join me in thanking Captain Ivan Nahachewski for his contributions and welcoming him and his family to this Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in with the member opposite in welcoming the Nahachewskis to their Legislative Assembly. And congratulations to Captain Ivan Nahachewski on the Meritorious Service Medal. And thank you so much for your service. I appreciate the fact that you folks are here to receive those accolades today, and I don't think we can overstate our appreciation. I'll also say hello to Deb Nahachewski, who I met several times throughout the cadet program. It feels like a past life at this point, but thank her for her service as well, and welcome Nina to their assembly today. And I'll ask all members to join me in welcoming them today.
Recognize the member from Batoche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to all members of the House, I'd like to introduce Mr. Corey Rieger. Corey, would you give us a wave? Corey's from Rostern Country, and he's here to watch the third reading of the Mennonite Waysment Bill, which was the private member's bill. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all you're doing, and I'd ask all members to welcome him.
Recognize the member from Cypress Hills.
Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, I'd like to welcome two individuals from the Great Southwest and the Fox Valley area, Tina and Frank Snyder. I'd like to welcome you here today, and we'll get to have a chat there after question period. Welcome to your legislature.
Recognize the member from Calvinton Wadena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Saving the best for last. I wish to welcome 10 grade 7, 8, and 9 students from Northern Skies School in Porcupine Plain, along with their teacher, Maddie Friesen, with parent guardians, Tom and Brenda Warkenton, David and Nancy Wolgamuth, Bruce and Marianne Taves, and Dwayne Schlan Penner. Welcome to your legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the Minister of Agriculture and recognize a special guest here today in our legislature, Emily Sebastian from Walmart. I was just reading some of the notes from the minister, and it says that the Saskatchewan Agriculture Student Scholarship is awarded to someone that shows a passion and dedication to agriculture. Well, this year they hit it out of the park. You could not find someone who's more dedicated and devoted to agriculture than Emily Sebastian. She comes from a really good agriculture family, good, solid people from Walmart, and I know she's very involved in 4-H, and that's actually where I got to know her best. She's good friends with my daughter Emma, and they're in 4-H together. She's the president of the Candiac 4-H Beef Club. I believe you're on the 4-H, you're ambassador for the Provincial 4-H Council, I believe, and she's just doing a great job in everything she does. I'd also like to make a quick mention of Kate Axton, and I don't know her, but I've heard her public speak in the 4-H public speaking competition, and there's another talented young individual we have in the province. So I'd like all members to help me welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Presenting petitions. I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present petitions as it relates to the unsafe conditions of Highway 9, particularly between Priestville and Hudson Bay being the focus here today. I've been presenting these petitions throughout the legislature, Mr. Speaker. The conditions are unsafe. There hasn't been the needed repair. Of course, this is a vital artery in such an important part of our province. It is a safety concern, and it's a huge impact for all those using it, those from the communities, those on the farm, local businesses, certainly those tourists as well that love that beautiful part of the province. The prayer reads as follows. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately address the inadequate condition of Highway 9 by working with and listening to the concerns of municipalities, residents and industry. These petitions today are signed by concerned residents of Hudson Bay. I so submit.
Recognized member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the government to scrap Bill 70. Those who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following. The independence of security at the legislature is of great importance to Saskatchewan people. It is a long-standing parliamentary custom that security maintain independence by reporting to the Speaker. The Speaker has a constitutional duty to defend the privileges of the legislature and its members. The Sergeant-at-Arms has successfully maintained the security of the legislature and its grounds since the 80s. Mr. Speaker, Bill 70 would turn the Sergeant-at-Arms into largely a ceremonial role, and it breaches tradition in how issues of security at the legislature are handled. Historically, Mr. Speaker, as you know, all security concerns have been discussed at the Bipartisan Board of Internal Economy. For some reason, Mr. Speaker, that's not happening anymore. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the government to stop the passage of Bill 70, the Legislative Assembly Amendment Act 2021. Mr. Speaker, those who signed the petition today come from Regina. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to be on my feet to present a petition to the government of Saskatchewan to fix the crisis in our classrooms. The petitioners today come from Regina and Moose Jaw, and they would like the Assembly to know that previous budgets, including the 2021-22 provincial budget, failed to fully fund contracts for teachers as well as other support staff. And when the government fails to meet those contractual obligations, it amounts to cuts in the classroom as school divisions are forced to make up the difference. Those cuts are hurting our students, and the petitioners want us to know that when the government leaves education, and including our support staff, without the resources that they need, it's students who pay the price. I'll read the prayer, Mr. Speaker. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to immediately fix the crisis in our classrooms by providing stable and adequate funding for public education in Saskatchewan. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Utana.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on my feet again today to present a petition calling on the provincial government to take real action to fight climate change. The United Nations has declared climate change the defining issue of our time. Their most recent report identifies that the most vulnerable people and natural systems are being disproportionately affected by weather and climate extremes as they are pushed beyond their ability to adapt. Without immediate action, adapting to impacts in the future will become more difficult and more costly. The government's failure to produce a credible economy-wide climate action plan risk devastating impacts on the province's economic productivity and human and environmental health. The Premier may not care that Saskatchewan has the highest greenhouse gas emissions per capita or as a percentage of GDP, but I can assure you the citizens signing this petition most certainly do. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, call on the provincial government to enact a credible climate action plan and allocate appropriate funding to ensure real reductions in Saskatchewan's emissions that are consistent with the scientific consensus to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The petition is signed by the residents of Regina. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to present a petition calling on the government of Saskatchewan to stop the closures at Wilkie and District Health Centre. These citizens wish to bring to our attention that the Saskatchewan Health Authority is unable to provide reliable and consistent healthcare services in Wilkie, that the Health Centre Emergency Department has been regularly closed for years. Several rural communities rely on Wilkie and District Health Centre for health services, and the hospital is a key component to the economic vitality of the region. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to stop closing emergency department and outpatient services at Wilkie and District Health Centre. This is signed by individuals from Wilkie today, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise to present the following petition. The folks who signed this petition wish to bring to your attention This government has been auctioning off Crown land and leases to the highest bidder. They haven't meaningfully consulted with impacted communities, and we only have 10% of Crown land left in this province. This government is breaching the treaty relationship and restricting access to traditional hunting, fishing, trapping, and medicine picking. And the provincial government must immediately stop selling off Crown land and leases and fix their broken duty to consult process. And the first right of refusal needs to be offered to First Nations in the treaty land entitlement process when Crown lands are being sold. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately stop the sell-off of Crown land and work with First Nation and Métis communities to develop a new duty to consult framework. The folks who signed this petition reside in Onion Lake. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize a member from Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, this year marks a very big milestone for an important community organization in our province, the Gay and Lesbian Community of Regina. GLCR is celebrating 50 years of serving the 2SL GBTQ+ community in Regina. And not only are they celebrating their 50th anniversary, they are proud to be the only community-owned and operated social organization left of its kind in all of Canada. Their theme, proudly owned and operated by the community we serve, is very appropriate. In 1972, a group of 7 friends joined together to create a safe space for the LGBT community. For the next half-century, through a number of moves, expansions, and thousands of volunteers, the GLCR has been supporting their community without assistance from government, relying on volunteers, donors, and revenues collected from the operations of their lounge and nightclub. Today, the GLCR is located in the heart of Regina and is known as the Q Nightclub and Lounge, and continues to provide a vibrant, safe social meeting centre. This hidden gem is woven into the fabric of Regina and fills an important role in our city and in our province. It's an honour to pay tribute to those who had the foresight to establish this much-needed space and to those who have tirelessly kept it going. I ask all members to join me in offering congratulations to Q and the GLCR. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Cannington.
Mr. Speaker, the Saskatchewan Agriculture Student Scholarship is an important part of our commitment to developing young agriculture leaders. Applicants submit a video or essay discussing how the industry can improve its transparency. Their passion to share their story with others is inspiring and helps build public trust in agriculture. This year's grand prize, $4,000 scholarship winner, is Emily Sebastian of Momart. In her submission, Emily discussed how consumers want to make sustainable choices about their food and how transparency lays the foundation to build trust between the producer and consumer. Our 3 runner-up winners were each awarded $2,000 to put toward their agricultural studies. These winners are Christy Peterson of Lockwood, Grace Waldenberger of Marquis, and Kate Axton of Minton. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to acknowledge the 2020 and 2021 recipients that join us here today. Due to public health restrictions, we were unable to invite them to join the proceedings in the years that they were awarded their scholarships. I have no doubt that they are on their way to completing their degrees, and I can't wait to see what they accomplish in their roles in the industry. I now ask all members to join me in congratulating these individuals on this outstanding accomplishment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
I rise today to recognize Classic, an organization in Saskatoon providing an invaluable service to both students at the U of S College of Law and the citizens of Saskatoon. Classic was founded 15 years ago by 3 College of Law students who identified a gap in legal services for individuals who did not qualify for legal aid but could not afford a private lawyer. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, that gap continues to grow as more and more people in our province struggle to make ends meet. As a community legal clinic, Classic offers a clinical learning experience for law students while providing a crucial service for low-income residents of Saskatoon. Students, with assistance from staff lawyers, can provide clients with full legal representation in approximately 20 areas of poverty law. As a law student, I had the privilege of participating in the walk-in advocacy clinic, where I saw firsthand the struggles experienced by so many in accessing justice in Saskatchewan. Classic provides an invaluable service to the people of Saskatoon while simultaneously strengthening students' understanding of the practice of law. By offering practical experience to law students, Classic leaves a lasting impression that gives soon-to-be lawyers first-hand experience with access to justice issues in Saskatchewan. I'd like to ask all members to join me in thanking the whole team at Classic, especially Executive Director Chantel Johnson, for all that they do in helping to improve access to justice in Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Estevan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have something very important to read into the record today, and it's something many of my constituents have been waiting 23 years to say. The Estevan Bruins are the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League champions. Mr. Speaker, the Bruins recently won their first league title since 1999 is the last time they won it. The Bruins faced off with the Flin Flon Bombers in a hard-fought 7-game series. Mr. Speaker, the home team won every game in this series, adding some credibility to having home team advantage. Well, advantage Estevan. Bruins goaltender Boston Billows was unstoppable in the final game. Mr. Speaker, Boston blocked all 30 shots, earning his second shutout of the series. In addition to winning the league title, Boston was named the playoffs' most valuable player. We are so proud of our hometown Bruins, Mr. Speaker, but their season isn't over yet. They will now compete for the National Junior A Championship. Later this month, the 10-team Centennial Cup tournament will be played in Estevan, and we can only hope that the home team advantage the Bruins enjoyed in the league final continues in the weeks ahead. I now ask all members to join me in congratulating the Estevan Bruins on winning the SJHL title and wish them well as they chase the national championship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Cut Knife Turtleford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unity Composite High School Activate team had a calling to help citizens of Ukraine. The team, led by an idea presented by co-chair Reid Martin, resulted in a month-long fundraiser. Mr. Speaker, with the help of the community, the group of UCHS students took on efforts and initiatives to help raise money for the cause. Unity residents have a special connection with Ukraine. A lot of the residents in the community have indicated that they can draw their heritage back to Ukraine. The Chamber of Commerce assisted through an email to inform businesses about their initiative, as well as posts on social media about upcoming events and updates, including a link to directly donate through the Red Cross. The school itself hosted events such as a culture fair and dessert auction. Prior to the end of April, they already had nearly $2,000 in donations. Mr. Speaker, please join me in congratulating the UCHS Activate team. Reid Martin, Nora Aldred, Tammy Dokerson of the Canadian Red Cross, Carrie Poitras, the Town of Unity, along with various businesses and community members for their contributions to help lessen the burden that the citizens of Ukraine are having to endure during a time of war. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Riversdale.
Mr. Speaker, I recently had the pleasure of introducing a young lady with many great accomplishments, Maryam Massoumi. Born in Iran, her family moved to Pakistan and then Afghanistan, where she would study educational administration at Kabul University. She worked as an assistant in music department at Merfat High School, where she led a group focused on empowerment, education, peace, women's rights, and dreams. Mr. Speaker, at a young age, in 2013, she worked as a volunteer at War Child Canada, a project for the less fortunate and street kids. She was selected to represent street workers and spoke of this in the Parliament in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, Maryam speaks 4 languages, and has tirelessly helped people her whole life. She wants to continue that work in Saskatoon and be the voice of the people. In her short time here, she has received an award from the City of Saskatoon Police and has also started an Afghan radio program on CFCR. I look forward to seeing what the future for this young, energetic woman will bring. I ask all members to join me in welcoming Miriam Masumi to Saskatoon Riversdale. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been working hard to accelerate the helium development in this province. Last year, our government introduced the Helium Action Plan. It included targets to supply 10% of the global helium market demand by 2030 and increase the helium purification and liquefaction facilities. Mr. Speaker, it's getting hard to keep up with all the good news coming from our emerging helium sector. Royal Helium just announced an arrangement agreement to acquire Imperial Helium Corp and the Alberta Company. Royal Helium is based in Saskatoon and hope to have 5 new wells in operation by next year. In other news, Mr. Speaker, Avanti Energy, a large helium producer in Western Canada and the United States, was just granted 3 helium exploration permits in Saskatchewan and will start exploring over 63,000 acres in the Southwest. Mr. Speaker, these announcements will create local jobs and show the industry, which shows the industry has faith in Saskatchewan. And we are proud of our many success stories in our resource industries. Mr. Speaker, we've been seeing record investment, job creation, and innovation. Our government will continue to create competitive and stable investment climate where we grow strong and sustainable Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the minister may think that Stats Canada is wrong, but the numbers don't lie. This government oversaw the only economy in Canada to shrink in the last year. The worst economic performance, the worst population growth, the worst pandemic response, and now we learn from the Canadian Institute for Health Information, the worst surgical wait times in the entire country. Saskatchewan people are the least likely patients in Canada to get their hip and knee surgeries on time. The least likely. Does the minister think that Saskatchewan people deserve better than the worst care in the country, or, like the Premier, does he simply not care?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I did have a chance to look at the Kai-Hai report. This report was very time sensitive. It was taken between April of 2020 and September of 2021, when we had some severe challenges within our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, and when 3 of those months we were actually shut down other than doing emergent surgeries. We do identify that there were some concerns at that point, Mr. Speaker, but as I identified yesterday, our surgical capacity is up. Mr. Speaker, in January to April of this year, we were able to average about 7,300 surgeries a month, Mr. Speaker, as compared to 2019, pre-COVID, where we were at 7,500 surgeries. We're only 200 surgeries away from meeting our 2019 targets, Mr. Speaker, but we're on track to be able to meet those targets and exceed them to be able to get our surgical capacity up to 97,000. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the pandemic was everywhere, but the numbers are worst right here, Mr. Speaker. Well, maybe the minister thinks Kai-Hai is wrong as well, but the numbers are clear. Only 43% of patients receive their hip surgeries within the 3-month benchmark. Only 30% get their knee replacements within that time. The national average is twice that high. We're not even close. What's the minister's explanation, beyond his and his government's glaring incompetence, for why Saskatchewan patients have to wait in pain so much longer than patients anywhere else in Canada?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've identified the surgical capacity as being an issue in this year's budget again, which they voted against, Mr. Speaker. We added in ICU capacity. We've added in surgical capacity, Mr. Speaker. We've also added into our privately run but our publicly funded surgeries, which the member from Lakeview, Mr. Speaker, who is running to be leader, the next leader sitting in there, Mr. Speaker, is actually wanting to cancel that. That's 120,000 surgeries over the last 10 years that would have been canceled, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, about 11,000 MRIs, Mr. Speaker. We're using all of our surgical capacity within our province, unlike the NDP who had cut out those private surgeries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shocking thing about these numbers, the worst in Canada, is they actually capture only the period up till September 2021. That's before this minister's abominable mismanagement of the fourth and fifth waves led to hundreds of avoidable deaths and hospitals that were completely overwhelmed, shutting down surgical capacity because of his decisions. By any measure that matters, this minister was already, before the pandemic, the worst health minister in the entire country. Mr. Speaker, this is the record of this government. How much worse are these surgical access numbers since the minister chose to pretend that the pandemic was over and give Saskatchewan the deadliest fourth and fifth waves in the entire country?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when we had our challenges in the fall of last year with COVID, Mr. Speaker, we were very transparent about what the programs and the services that we had to reduce at that time because of the influx of the Delta wave. We were communicating that with the public on a daily basis. We did all of our public health measures in consultation with Dr. Shahab. And again, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't like Dr. Shahab's advice, Mr. Speaker, but we were following his advice, Mr. Speaker, all the way through this pandemic. We continue. We thank Dr. Shahab. We thank all those frontline healthcare workers that were out there that were pivoting from job to job to be able to maintain our healthcare system and be able to roll out our vaccines in an efficient way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, 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 hear. Recognize the member for Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we're joined by education workers here in their assembly. And they've traveled here from across the province because they're tired of seeing year after year of cuts. Cuts to jobs, cuts to supports for our kids, and cuts that hurt our next generations. They're here because they see right through the spin that comes from that minister. If they thought that the 200 EA plan was enough or would work or was a promise that they believed in, then they wouldn't be here today. Will the minister look to the gallery and talk straight to our visitors and set the spin aside for once? Will he admit that after two of the hardest years that our kids have been through, two of the hardest years for those who are supporting our kids in schools, that now is not the time to force cuts onto our classrooms?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to join with the member opposite in welcoming all of our guests from the education sector that are here in the legislature, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think as we've talked about on the floor of this assembly before, this budget does provide for $1.99 billion in operating funding for school divisions, Mr. Speaker. That's a record amount for education funding in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. We're going to build on what we've done over the last 5 years, particularly when it comes to EAs in the classroom, Mr. Speaker. Those numbers are up 449 positions in the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we've said to school divisions there's an additional $7 million in this budget on top of that funding, Mr. Speaker, to hire 200 more positions into the classroom, Mr. Speaker. So 449 over the last 5 years. We're going to add 200 more positions, Mr. Speaker, more dollars for supports for learning, Mr. Speaker, and more funding into the classrooms. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
He just can't let go of that same old tired spin. And he keeps bringing it up. It's not sticking with the workers who are here today. I promise you that. Mr. Speaker, since 2016, school division operating funding, it has increased 5.1%. But in that same time period, the Canadian Price Index is up 14.5%. So what's the impact on school divisions? Cutting teachers, cutting EAs, squeezed fuel costs, and now warning families of more cuts and more reductions to come. These are cuts and reductions that put livelihoods in limbo. These are the careers of EAs, library workers, admin assistants, and building operators once again on the chopping block. Does the minister have an ounce of empathy? Does he care what this means for our next generation?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, often we have to correct what is said on this floor from members opposite. 2 weeks ago, the member from Lakeview said, and I quote, "There are over 21% fewer EAs working in our schools today than there were just 5 years ago," end quote. Mr. Speaker, that is not accurate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2017-2018, there were 3,383 EAs positions in the province, Mr. Speaker, EAs employed by school divisions. This year, there are 3,832. That's a 13% increase, not a 21% decrease. 449 more EAs employed in the last 5 years. And, Mr. Speaker, we are going to add 200 to that with this new $7 million fund, Mr. Speaker, that will be directed to school divisions to hire more EAs for the classroom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, it's uncomfortable to watch this minister squirm his way out of answering the question that I just asked him. And he won't even acknowledge how many more students are in our schools that aren't getting the support that they need. Mr. Speaker, the proof is in the pudding. In 2015, education was 26% of the provincial pie. Last year, it was 21%. Now, in our schools, the work is getting harder, and there are fewer people there to do it. This means class sizes increase with fewer supports that students rely on. Kids will go without the support that they need, especially now at this crucial time. Is the minister proud to leave our schools entering next year with more students and fewer supports?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is why we're providing record funding for school divisions this year. $1.99 billion, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that school divisions can have the staff that they need to ensure that students in this province get an education, get the skills, the knowledge, and the character to be able to succeed in their education and beyond, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, that is why we're working with school divisions to provide $6 million for more additional supports for learning in the classroom. In addition to that, the $7 million for EA positions, Mr. Speaker, that will be required of the school divisions to hire additional EAs, educational assistants, 200 more positions on top of the 449 that have been hired over the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not a single school division have submitted a budget yet to the ministry, Mr. Speaker, and so we'll wait until they actually deliver budgets to the province for approval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this education minister has found himself offside with the SSBA, offside with school divisions, offside with the STF, and now with the education workers here in their assembly, he's offside with them too. Mr. Speaker, other provinces understood the task at hand. Concern for the impact on students and our school system wasn't just a talking point, it drove them to act, investing millions of dollars in a pandemic recovery for our kids. Other provinces figured it out. Why, knowing the enormous task ahead to get kids back on track, did this government fail to create a plan? And instead they provided another austerity budget that is already causing cuts to jobs and supports that our kids need right now.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we did work with all of those groups that the member opposite indicated, the SSBA and others, Mr. Speaker, to develop a plan, particularly in light of the last 2 years and what COVID has meant for kids and our staff across this province, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we're focusing on grade attainment for those that are finishing their academic career, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're focusing on mental health, and that's why we're focusing on literacy at the early years, Mr. Speaker. And that's specifically why we indicated in this budget through an investment of $7 million that's going to allow for 200 additional EAs to be hired into this school system, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, rather than putting into the base budget, Mr. Speaker, that's why we're directing school divisions, should they choose, to apply for those dollars, the $7 million, so that EAs, educational assistants, will be hired Mr. Speaker. That's what the fund is for, on top of the record investment in education in this budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, 900 jobs were lost in Saskatchewan, 4,500 lost the month before. The worst jobs losses in Canada, and all this with our education sector facing more cuts, which isn't just shortchanging our future, but is also job losses. So a simple question to the minister. What do you say to the families, people without paychecks relying on food banks, counting their dollars to fill up their tanks? How are you going to fix this?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is what the NDP do. They cherry-pick stats to talk down the economy. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is this. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in Canada. We created 18,000 jobs over the course of the last year. Wholesale trade is up 37%, Mr. Speaker, year over year. Manufacturing sales up 40%, number one in the country, Mr. Speaker. Exports up 25%, which doesn't happen without a lot of work, Mr. Speaker. $14 billion of new private sector investment and more on the way, Mr. Speaker. But what do we hear from the NDP? Constant negativity, constant talking down to the economy, attacking companies making investments, attacking job creators who are putting our people to work, Mr. Speaker. We know what they don't like because they stand up every day and say it. They don't like the energy sector. They don't like pipelines. They don't like trade agreements. They don't like uranium. They don't like nuclear. They don't like mining. They don't like forestry. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have 48 very, very positive members who know our best days are still ahead of us, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be clear about what we don't like. We don't like people working full-time and living in poverty. We don't like people working day in and day out, honest work, having to rely on food banks to feed their families. Reality check, Mr. Speaker, a net decline of 4,500 jobs in the last 2 months. The minister can spin it however he wants, but those numbers don't lie. Last month, the unemployment rate went down in every other province except Saskatchewan. Our unemployment rate shot up 10%, higher than the national average. Inflation at a 31-year high, economic growth slowed to a trickle. Job losses, there's a term for that, Mr. Speaker, one that members in this House should be familiar with. So will the minister admit that what he's doing just isn't working, and as a result, neither are people?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Again, Mr. Speaker, you see what they do. They try and talk down the economy every single chance that they get. The public in this province know that we created 18,000 jobs in this province over the course of the last year. Mr. Speaker, what was their economic policy for the last year? It was shut down the economy. Every day they stood up session after session, day after day, and demanded of this government to shut down the economy, Mr. Speaker. We didn't listen to them. We didn't listen to them, Mr. Speaker, because we knew people needed to be at work.
Order, please. Order. Minister.
You know, you see the sort of class from the members opposite, Mr. Speaker. They ask a question, we respond to the question, and they scream from their seats that somehow we're not answering the question. Mr. Speaker, we have created 18,000 jobs in this province over the course.
Collective we.
See, Mr. Speaker, the complete lack of class from the Leader of the Opposition. This member who has 6 days left in this chamber, who is demonstrating the complete lack of class that he has demonstrated throughout his entire time here, Mr. Speaker.
Next question. Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a deeply unserious answer from that minister to cheers and applause from his front bench. You know, Mr. Speaker, with this government's hands on the wheel, everything that should be up is down and everything that should be down is up. They've doubled the size of the government, added 32 taxes and fees onto people already struggling to make ends meet. 5 out of the last 7 years, our economy has been smaller. In 2021, our GDP shrank. In fact, Mr. Speaker, again, in 5 out of the last 7 years, our GDP has declined. We are the only province with that humiliating distinction. Jobs are down, population is stagnating, young people are leaving the province in droves, and Mr. Speaker, our economy is smaller than it was in 2013. So let's go to that classic question, Mr. Speaker. Are you better off than you were? The answer is a resounding no. So how does this minister measure this as a success?
Recognize Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What measures success is $14 billion of new investment into this province by companies who could deploy their capital anywhere in the world. Where are they choosing to deploy their capital, Mr. Speaker? In tens of billions of dollars, $14 billion. They're choosing to deploy their capital here, Mr. Speaker. Why are they doing that? Because they have great faith in the future of this province, and also because they know those members opposite are never going to get the chance to govern again, Mr. Speaker. Because I guarantee you, if they thought these members were going to be in charge again, they wouldn't have been deploying $14 billion in capital, because their record speaks for itself. Nationalizations, Mr. Speaker, chasing out private industry, their opposition to the energy sector, their opposition to pipelines, their dislike of uranium, their dislike of nuclear, their opposition to trade agreements, their record on the economy, their economic illiteracy, Mr. Speaker, is known right across the country. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have great faith in the people of this province. We have great faith in the future of this economy, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to attract investment. We're going to continue to create jobs. Our best days are still ahead of us.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon-Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, there's nothing standing between Omicron and our classrooms. Kids are getting sick, and so are staff. With so few public health protections to protect students and staff, we should be doing everything we can to increase vaccination rates among kids. We asked the government about how they plan to increase vaccination rates among kids, and we didn't get an answer. Does the minister agree that 41% of kids under 12 with their second shot isn't good enough? And if so, what is the plan to do better?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we provided the citizens of Saskatchewan all the information that they need to battle and the importance of getting vaccinated, not just their first and second dose, but also their first dose and their first booster dose. And if they're eligible for their second booster dose, they should go in and get that right away. What we are not going to do is mandate vaccines, which I think that they're calling for, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to hold children down and force a needle into their arm, Mr. Speaker. We're going to let those discussions happen around the kitchen table so parents can have those important discussions with their family to be able to protect themselves and their community and their neighbours, Mr. Speaker. What we will not do is force vaccines on children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member Saskatoon-Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, it would be nice if the ministers opposite would stick remotely close to the facts. And the fact is, they're doing nothing to protect our kids. Mr. Speaker, we should be making it as easy as possible to help kids get their shot and to help them get protected. This government introduced vaccination leave for adults to get their first shot, but they haven't done the same for parents who need to take their kids. With our pediatric rates so low, it only makes sense to allow parents paid leave from work to help get these numbers up. Will the minister commit to paid vaccination leave for parents today?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We do have great access to vaccination clinics, not just in our major centres, but at our pharmacies, who have been great partners throughout this, Mr. Speaker. We have a multitude of vaccination products available. We also have lots of sites, Mr. Speaker. I understand that that could create some challenges for some individuals, but that's why we were doing it through their pharmacies, Mr. Speaker, because most people have access to their pharmacies on a very regular basis, and certainly in rural communities, they have they have a good working relationship with with their pharmacists. If they have to come in after hours, they're able to do that, Mr. Speaker, because the pharmacists are always there for their clients. Mr. Speaker, we do have vaccination clinics. We'll continue to have those vaccination clinics as long as we have COVID in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon.
Mr. Speaker, if they're so accessible, then why are the rates at 41%? The minister did not answer the question. When we first called for this leave, the Labour minister told the media that his government would strongly consider supporting this. He said he directed officials to assess options and plan to bring those recommendations to Cabinet. In his words, quote, "It's certainly something I would take forward, saying this is a way to get more vaccinations into more arms," end quote. But then he flip-flopped, saying kids' vaccination rates were good enough, but they aren't anymore, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister give us one good reason that he's not taking the steps that will, in the minister's own words, quote, "get more vaccinations into more arms"?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since the vaccines arrived, we have done nothing but promote vaccines in all of our communities. We've had access to those vaccines, Mr. Speaker, across. We flew them up north, Mr. Speaker, to rural and remote communities, Mr. Speaker. We have these available. What the crux of this is, Mr. Speaker, is it's a personal choice for the individuals. They don't believe that families should have that personal choice, and they believe that government should mandate that, Mr. Speaker. We do believe that they should have that personal choice. Of course, we're promoting that vaccines should be done across the board, Mr. Speaker, that everybody that is eligible should be able to get their vaccine, but those decisions are with the families if they want their children to get vaccinated, Mr. Speaker. We've been promoting it with advertising campaigns, through social media, through billboards, Mr. Speaker, to the importance of going out, getting your first and second dose, and also your first and second dose of your booster if you're eligible. We'll continue to support that as long as COVID's in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Cumberland.
Mr. Speaker, this is the 18th day this spring I rise on behalf of Saskatchewan families, today the Charles family, who lost a loved one to suicide. When will we see a real plan to save Saskatchewan lives?
Here.
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, the Government of Saskatchewan released the Pillars for Life Suicide Prevention Plan, Mr. Speaker, and that helps guide the initiatives that are underway in this province, Mr. Speaker, and a number of those initiatives that we're continuing to expand. Mr. Speaker, I extend my condolences to the Charles family and every family in this province that's been impacted by suicide. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of initiatives, as I said, that are currently underway that have been expanded in recent years, whether it's the community recovery teams, Mr. Speaker, which provide people with support that have chronic and persistent mental health challenges, the police and crisis teams, which pair a registered mental health worker with police when responding to calls, Mr. Speaker, mental health capacity building in schools, which initially began as a pilot project in 5 schools in the province, Mr. Speaker, and with more funding in this year's budget is expanding into other schools, Mr. Speaker. The expansion of Family Services Saskatchewan, which provides the walk-in mental health clinics into a number of communities in this province, and with more dollars in this year's budget, we'll get into an additional 8 communities such as Moose Jaw, Assiniboia, Gravelbourg, Kindersley, Bigger, Leader, Rosetown, and Unity, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to consult with people across this province as we enhance these initiatives on this very important work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. Good job. I just want to go into some of the things, unparliamentary language. I'm referring to what the Leader of the Opposition said during your questions. The member from Regina University. You're making personal comments. You're cloaking it somewhat, but they're personal comments. You cannot do indirectly what is not allowed directly. And your opening line, Leader of the Opposition, you've apologized for saying exactly that line in the past. And, again, you can't work the word lie into indirectly. You can't say it directly. I believe you also said, referring to the member, I believe there's Minister of Health, incompetent. That's a personal comment. You just cannot make those comments. And to the member from Regina University, completely without class. Again, it's a personal comment. You cannot make those comments. Well, it's okay. We'll check answer. You also said something about lying too. I didn't quite catch every word, but please stay away from the personal comments. And yeah, I can ask you to apologize again, but just stop making that. That'll be my ruling today. Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Point of order. What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate very much your comments, but the member needs to stand in their place and apologize. I refer specifically to the Leader of the Opposition, who, in his final 6 days in this place, seems determined to go out in much the same way he's conducted himself during his time here. But the member referred to the Minister of Health not using his proper title for the upteenth time, which he has apologized for repeatedly. He needs to stand in his place and do it again. During your ruling, Mr. Speaker, they're standing there making faces, rolling their eyes, whatever else they're doing, clearly doing all they can to signal their disagreement, showing no respect for you, Mr. Speaker, and no respect for this institution, which they have demonstrated day after day after day. The Leader of the Opposition needs to stand in his place, withdraw and apologize what was clearly a comment that was out of order.
He had nothing, Doyle.
Recognize the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, no, I think that what is happening right now with the government House Leader is that he's challenging your ruling where you provided caution to members. So I would also remind him that that is a rule that he's breaking at this moment. This is feeling pretty petty, so I would just leave my comments at that.
Yes, I've made my ruling for today, and I just again ask both sides if I misunderstood who said the comment about completely without class. Whoever said it, I asked you not to make those personal comments. Both sides, you've got to stop making personal comments. We'll leave it at this today, but in the future, I'll be asking you to withdraw and apologize. Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill number 79, the Saskatchewan Indigenous Investment Finance Corporation Act, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on bills? I recognize the Minister. Kind of Minister. I reckon. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, and that the bill be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration of the bill of the Committee of the Whole on Bill number 79, and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? Carried. I recognize the Government House Leader.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
Minister may proceed to third reading. Oh, sorry. It has been moved by the Minister that Bill number 79 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is Assembly ready for the question? Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill Number 80, the Innovation Saskatchewan Amendment Act 2022, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill Number 80 and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the Minister that Bill Number 80 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill Number 81, the Labour Mobility and Fair Registration Practices Act, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill Number 81 and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the Minister that the Bill Number 81 be read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report that it has considered certain estimates and to present its third report. I move that the third report of the Standing Committee on the Economy be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the Chair that the third report of the Standing Committee on the Economy be now concurred in. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice to report that it has considered certain estimates and to present its third report. I move that the third report of the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the Chair that the third report of the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice be now concurred in. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the chair of the Private Bills Committee.
I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Private Bills to report Bill number 905, the Amenity Trust Act 2022, without amendment, and to present its fifth report. I move that the fifth report of the Standing Committee of the Private Bills be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the chair that the fifth report of the Standing Committee on Private Bills be now concurred in. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. I recognize the member for Batoche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to waiver consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 905, the Amnesty Trust Act 2022, and that the bill be now read the third time.
The member has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 905, the Amnesty Trust Act 2022, and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? The member may proceed to move third reading.
I move that this bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the member that Bill number 905, the Amnesty Trust Act 2022, be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Orders of the day.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 1, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 82, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2022. Ms. Beck.
I recognize the member from Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To join in on adjourned debates, Bill number 82, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2022. I've already spoken to this bill, and I know there's work that needs to be done in committee, and there'll be some questions the critic will have, and I'm prepared to just allow Bill 82 go through the process it needs to for the work to continue forward. So with that, I conclude my comments on Bill 82, the Income Tax Act Amendment Act 2022.
The question before the Assembly is a motion by the member that Bill number 82 be now read a second time. It's the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Agree? Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recommend. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on Crowns and Central Agencies.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 2, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 84, the Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2022. Ms. Ritchie.
Recognize a member from Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To join on Bill number 84, the Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2022. I'm going to make some comments. I know there's work that needs to go on at 3 o'clock. There's a committee, and Bill 70 is going to be dealt with. So I'm going to, have some comments on it, and I'm going to go through talking about 84. But I know there's work that needs to be done at 3 o'clock. I'm kind of being pressured now to get done, and I know everybody, government side, wants to stay to hear Bill 70 and the minister answer questions. So, but I want to come back to a little bit about provincial sales tax and the revenue coming in to the government coffers to, I was hoping, help northern people, our seniors with the cost of living, because there's extra money. This government, the money's rolling into the government coffers, and they're getting lots of money and charging new taxes. And I've talked about this earlier. 32 new taxes and fees. We've been saying that. We've been hearing that out there. When you actually share with people what they're actually doing, people go, "Are you kidding me?" And they'll say, "Are you kidding me? They're charging us more tax, more fees, like more 32 more taxes, fees. Yes, that's what you're getting from your government." People are not impressed. I'm telling you, I've seen seniors, I've seen families who are struggling to make ends meet, cannot understand when the economy is going so good, as the minister says, he's done so much and the government has done so much on that file that it's just the money's coming in because they work so hard. Lights are on in his office 24/7. He's working so hard to get everybody, every industry to come into Saskatchewan. That's interesting to say. I hope that same minister that's doing all that work would take a little time and be here this afternoon when we talk about Bill 70, and maybe he can shed some light and ask the minister to please shed some light and answer some questions. It'll be interesting to see how that all happens. And I'm curious of that. But I want to get back to Bill 84, because this government has the revenue that it's getting, the priorities it's picking, the priorities that the government's picking. I was hoping, we would see more dollars, honestly, gone into mental health addictions. And I know the government, and I give them credit, they've put a little bit more money, but when we have a crisis going on, when it comes to the money coming into the government coffers, and the money coming from Bill 84, that will generate lots of money in the government coffers. And I understand the government gets to pick its priorities. We've seen that. And again, it's almost like I'm saying this over and over. The member from Athabasca, who was elected in here not too long ago in a by-election, and I've said that, yeah, say here, because he's got some work to do. Trust me, that member has a lot of work to do. Because there were things with those dollars, with the dollars that were generated, from these taxes, we were hoping, maybe they would help the northern people. Because, I guess campaigns happen and people were said, we're going to fight for you, have a member part of government, and we're going to fight for you. And I've said this a number of times, but I think it's important, because I've talked to some people and said, I want to listen to that. So yeah, we were going to get all this, and we were hoping to get some more dollars for our roads, housing, stuff that have been shut down, and maybe government has closed. The Sask Party government, you've been there just about 15 years. You've shut so many programs down in the north, and the west side has impacted. I've seen that. The Athabasca constituency has felt that and seen that. And they were hoping with all this new money they're going to get in, because they didn't know there was going to all this new money and they were going to charge more. They thought they were going to get some relief and some help. Instead, as I've said, what the member brought them was part of government now. He's a part of government, 32 more taxes and fees and more and less and less. So having said that, the government has its priorities, and I love watching how the government, and I don't always want to be harsh, with the dollars coming in the backbenchers, and I've always said this to them. You have a chance to put pressure on the minister and cabinet and the premier, and I hope you will do that, and remind them that some of the families that are struggling out there, when it comes to mental health, addictions, when it comes to affordability, not everyone's, the boom's not for everybody. Like the minister likes to spin it, that everything's going great. It isn't. So when you're asking more money from people who are struggling to make ends meet, and you ask a little more from them, and I know, the government says, it's just a little more, it's just a little more. I think some people, our seniors, are the most vulnerable, have suffered enough. Like, they have paid their price. Seniors have paid for years. They've done their good part, and we thank them for that. But they shouldn't be more and more taxes put on them, more and more. Ask them to give and give when they can't afford it anymore. I watch some of the families who are struggling, and they say, we just can't afford to pay any more provincial sales tax, any more fees. Like, how's the government doing it? Why don't they listen to us? And you have seniors and you have most vulnerable. They're asking their government to slow down and give them a break, help them right now when they need the help the most. But what do we get from the government? No, we have other priorities. We're going to spend money wherever we want because we're the government. We're this big majority, and Her Majesty's loyal opposition is so small, you don't really count. We're the big government, and we we have majority, and and I get it, they laugh and they think it's all funny, and that's okay. But Mr. Speaker, I could go on, and I know that we have to get to some other business today. I know I even asked our House Leader, could I just go on and just talk about some of the serious challenges people are facing? And I was kind of discouraged, said, you shouldn't. So on that note, Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to just wind up my comments on Bill 84, the provincial sales tax, and let it go through the process it needs to go through as it goes to the committee and do the work that needs to be done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the Assembly is a motion by the member that Bill 84 be now read a second time. It's the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I designate that Bill number 84, the Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2022, be referred to the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. Just before I take a motion to adjourn, I'd like to just clarify and apologize to the member from Regina University. The comment about completely out of class was not made by her. It came from the government side. I'm not sure who made it. But again, to everyone, please stop making the personal comments. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In order to facilitate the work of committee this afternoon and this evening, I move that this House do now adjourn.
The Government House Leader has moved to adjourn the House. It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow.